This is the examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers podcast with Tony Bruschi.
We are talking with licensed psychologist Dr. John Delatorre today. I want to get your insight into what is happening here in this circus that we see surrounding Rudy Farias over the last 2 weeks.
I think when we're looking at this, it closely aligns with something that we know as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Mm-hmm. We've seen this a couple of times recently, where essentially the mother or the primary caregiver, it doesn't have to be the mother, but usually is, the primary caregiver seems to need attention for some reason. And through that attention, they find that the most satisfactory aspect is when people believe they are caregiving for a child that is sick. Now, that's not necessarily the entire context of this particular case, but what it seems like is there's an element of control and there's an element of attention-seeking behavior. And so the individual does things to ensure that the victim in the case remains sick, and so that the rest of the community can give the primary caregiver all the attention that individual needs. So when we look at this case, it looks like it was missing was the actual thing that she did in order to ensure that she was continuing to get the attention that she wanted, was to make sure that people believed that her son had been missing this whole time when he actually wasn't.
Someone who has Munchausen syndrome by proxy, I mean, I'm thinking of the cases of like Dee Dee Blanchard and her daughter Gypsy Rose. That's one of the more prominent ones that we've seen recently in the years out of Springfield, Missouri. Is this something that comes on at a certain point in life, as far as them thinking this is a good idea, or the disorder becomes their best option? Is this something where it's kind of always a facet of their personality? In this case here that we're specifically talking about, her husband had committed suicide several years back after being charged and implicated in some police corruption in Houston. And then the older son that she had, the brother to Rudy, died in a tragic accident. So it really just ended up being Rudy and the mom together. And seems like the son, Rudy, was kind of looked at to do some of the more male type duties around the home and then some.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any real particular pathway to someone having the symptoms associated with this kind of psychiatric issue. Mm-hmm. I think, though, it is context related. And it's certainly possible that some of these individuals who would be willing to engage in this probably exhibited some self-harm behavior earlier in life. What we have to remember is that Munchausen syndrome, as it's described, starts with the individual needing attention, so they'll do things to themselves. And at some point, it extends further. So they stop doing things to themselves and start doing things to someone else. That's where the by proxy comes from. Mm-hmm. And so it is certainly possible that there was a time in which maybe she didn't feel good about herself and maybe engaged in ideas about whatever it was that was going on in her life, low self-esteem kinds of things. And given the context of loss, it corrupted and became more disturbed, and the control that she needed to feel the control that she needed to have in order to not feel isolated and alone became so exaggerated that she was willing to engage in these kinds of behaviors, even to her own son.
Yeah. The video that I just had a chance to watch, it was an interview that was conducted by Fox 26 in Houston and some other reporters as well, sitting down and having a lengthy conversation with Rudy Farias. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. To me, I'll just say this, it felt a little bit off. I was very surprised by just how aware Rudy seemed to be of his situation, of what he was coming out of. And I was also a bit surprised by how he would kind of go off on tangents about things that didn't seem to really connect at all with the case, about colors, about society, and things of that nature. What were your thoughts?
My thoughts were that this interview never should have happened.
Sure. Well, number one.
My thoughts, my thoughts were that his entire existence has been invaded by people who say that they are there for him, that say that they are there to speak for him, that say that they are there to help him. And I'm not just talking about the media, I'm talking about his mother too.
Yeah.
And so he exists in a world in which the notion that anyone would actually take care of you, that anyone who actually proclaims that they are on your side is not to be trusted. And this interview, that number one, if anyone wants to conduct this interview, it should have only been one person.
Yeah.
And there's a piece in there where he says, and I think this is why he agreed to do this interview. He says that the media had kind of changed and did some things about his statements about what had been happening to him, and made it much more seedier than what it was. The example that he primarily gives is he told either the police or he told someone that his mother would force him to sleep in a bed next to her.
Yeah.
What he says is that he wasn't sleeping in the same bed next to her, that there was a bed next to her bed that he was sleeping in. And so he goes off and says that, the media had changed it to make it something sexual when it wasn't. Now, do I think he was sexually abused? I actually do think he was sexually abused, but that's not the point. The point was that I think he needed to get control over what was going on with him, because this was his life. These were his experiences that other people were proclaiming he had, and were shifting what was actually going on. And so it's this fascinating and morbid insight into the confusing aspect of his life, where he wants to love his mother because that's his mother, and he wants to do right by her because, again, he wants to be a good son. And everything that he knows that he should be doing, he's not allowed to do. Every developmental milestone that he should be hitting, including, like you said, he just wants to make money, right? He wants to have a job and make money.
Yeah.
He's not allowed to do that either. And so he at some point, we need to have agency in our own lives. And he's lived an entire life in which he's never had agency. And in this video, the first thing that stuck out to me is that the agency is being taken away from him again, this time by strangers in the media who he needed to talk to because they're changing what's going on, what actually happened to him. But also he has no clear understanding of what exactly it was that they were doing when they were interviewing him.
I think a lot of the confusion comes in. I don't necessarily blame the media on some of this, because they were quoting, again, it was from someone else. It was from Quennell X, who was his advocate there for some time. He was right in there with the police during the interviews, and we saw conflicting stories come out from the Houston PD and Quennell X. Very dramatically different stories. The Houston PD kind of questioning the legitimacy, it seemed almost, of what exactly Rudy had been saying, or the accusations that the mom and Rudy had given. Quennell X coming out and making those statements about the sexual nature of it, never going and saying intercourse, but very much talking about being kissed on the lips, inappropriate things that then Rudy contradicts himself in that latest interview that he gave. Now, obviously, this is someone who's been through a lot of trauma. So I'm trying to understand, is this a case of a story that is changing with Rudy, depending on who he's talking to? Is this a case of someone who's been through so much trauma and they're only going to speak certain pieces at certain times because that's how they're trying to process it?
Yeah, when I'm thinking about why there would be such conflicting stories, it's because the mind can only handle so much, right? The mind can only handle whatever it can handle in that moment. It can't handle anymore, or else it's going to break. And so here we have someone whose entire life has been a conflicting story, whose entire life has been a conflict of emotions and behaviors that, of course, it's going to come. We can't apply real world logic to what happened between these two people. In order to do so, would completely unravel. We have to apply what the internal logic was between the two of them, the dynamics between the two of them, and it's going to come across as confusing, right? Of course it will be, and it's going to remain confusing until until we get a corroborating piece of evidence like a video or an audio recording, which we're probably not going to get. So I'm not surprised that everything comes out as being conflicting to something that we previously had heard, because it's always going to be that way in these kinds of cases.
You're locked into the Hidden Killers podcast.
Want more? Start binging on all of our true crime podcasts right now through Apple Podcasts and get an ad-free experience when you sign up to be a True Crime Today Premium Plus member, exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
More of the Hidden Killers podcast, dropping soon.
Press subscribe now.